So the Brawl for All episode of The Dark Side of the Ring is in the books, and it is quite the tale. So there's three people operating, three camps operating. There's the Russo camp, who just wants to put on quote unquote entertaining television. He doesn't really care about wrestling. He doesn't really care about the wrestlers. He doesn't really care about the wrestling business. He is actually targeting a non-wrestling audience. He is a non-wrestling guy who wants to target the non-wrestling audience, the Jerry Springer audience. This is what he said in the documentary. This has been true of Vince Russo. Every time I've heard an interview from him, he thinks that the actual wrestling is the worst part of wrestling and that everything else is more important. The second thing is you have the WWE office, Pritchard, McMahon, Ross, all these guys who, went to each of the talent to ask them to participate in this thing, knowing full well they only really wanted one guy to win, which was Dr. Death Steve Williams, and they still invited fucking Dan Severn to be in the tournament, right? You put a trained fucking killer in the tournament. Why would you do that? If you really want one guy to win the fucking tournament, why would you put fucking Dan Severn in the tournament? Even though Dan Severn was smart enough to get himself out of the tournament, why the fuck would you put him in it in the first place? He's a fucking trained fighter. It was fucking stupid. And then you have Bart Gunn, who is the underdog, the guy nobody expected to win. They had completely written him off, and they started kind of putting the screws to him. And he's talked about all of the guys who, Briscoe, who is a legitimate shooter, who had complete faith in Dr. Death Steve Williams, because Dr. Death Steve Williams is a legit shooter, and Jim Ross, who has said many times that Dr. Death Steve Williams is essentially one of his little brothers, and he recruited him personally. And even though he kind of promised there wouldn't be any heat on Bart Gunn if he was to beat Dr. Death, there was tremendous heat on him for beating Dr. Death. And then, you have Pritchard, who was the guy who did the matchmaking, because Pritchard is the guy who put Bart Gunn up against Bob Holly, who was his tag team partner at the time. And yes, that is fucked up. I mean, as a kid, I didn't care about that team. I didn't care about Bart Gunn at all. In fact, I was so glad to see Bart Gunn in this documentary because I have not seen Bart Gunn at all, period, since WrestleMania 15. I probably couldn't tell you when the last time I saw Bart Gunn do anything. I probably had not thought about him until this documentary happened. So I was really glad to see Bart Gunn. I was glad to see that he was healthy and he kind of, walked away from the business in one piece, but he was still kind of bitter, and he had a right to be bitter because there was this promise of a big push if you win this tournament, but at the same time, they wanted to rig the tournament, but they didn't want to rig the tournament. So those are the three camps. So you have to go to Russo. Now, Russo is a fucking retard who, again, does not like wrestling, who wants to make wrestling for a non-wrestling audience. And he creates this Brawl for All concept. Now, a smart person like me, I'm going to be arrogant on this one. A smart person like me would say, the reason why the Brawl for All happened is because at one point, tough man competitions were popular in the United States. It was a popular thing to have tough man competitions. This was before the UFC really blew up. So you would have these sort of mostly unregulated boxing tournaments where you would have guys of different weight classes fighting each other. You would have, and they would just be brawls. It wouldn't be professional fights. It would just be brawling. These were popular for a while in the United States. I think that would be the motivation to have a Brawl for All tournament. But no, Russo's reason for having a Brawl for All tournament is Bradshaw talked too much. I just wanted to shut him up. Really? That's your reason for injuring half a dozen fucking guys, ruining a big investment for a multi-million dollar investment in Dr. Death Steve Williams? That's your reason? Because you were upset that Bradshaw talked too much? And then Bradshaw still almost won the fucking tournament. He got to the finals. Russo is... Now, look, that shit is cancerous. Now I see why Cornette hate him so much. I see it. He really rubbed me the wrong way in this documentary, and his inability, his lack of self-awareness, that he saw all of these guys. He ruined Dr. Death's not only his reputation but his career, because he tore his hamstring in that fight with Bart Gunn, and got knocked out. So he was injured and he lost. So it really was dumb. Dan Severn was smart enough to get the fuck out the tournament early. And the only reason the Godfather was in position to get knocked out by Bart Gunn is because Dan Severn said even though he won his fight, he got the fuck out of there. He's like, nah. I have a legitimate reputation. I don't want nothing to do with this. I'm out of here. Smart guy, that Dan Severn. A lot smarter than the other cooks that was in this kitchen. So Severn gets the fuck out. They should have just called the tournament there. Like when the professional killer don't want to do it, they should have just said, okay, let's just call this off because the office wanted only one guy to win. Why not just say, all right, we thought we was going to do this as a shoot. Let's just work this thing. Okay. Everybody go out there. You don't hit each other all that hard. You know, we want this guy to win this fight. We want this guy to win this fight. We set the standard that is going to be a legit fight, and we do it for a week. That's going to turn to shit. Bunch of people get hurt. Maybe not. But it's ugly as bad TV. We're going to just work it from this point forward. That's all they had to do. That's really all they had to do was go to Bart Gunn and everybody else who was still in the tournament after the first week and say, hey, look, we changed our mind. It's not going to be a shoot tournament anymore. We're going to work this thing because we don't want anybody to get hurt. And the professional fucking fighter thinks that this is a bad idea. And, you know, everybody's shitting on this. The crowd is shitting on it. Everybody hates it, right? But I guess Vince McMahon had just committed to the idea and just decided, well, we got 16 guys here, pal. We got to do it. You know, it's like, fuck this. Fuck this. You know, this is a stupid fucking idea. Okay? It's stupid. It's a stupid fucking idea. And it was even crazier that, you know, they had no plans for anybody other than one guy to win. That's why you work things. You know, there was no plans for any other guy to win. So they told Bart Gunn, who came across like the babyface, because he is the babyface. Bart Gunn didn't ask for this, right? He was a guy who, after his tag team broke up, the Smoking Guns, they had nothing for him. They didn't even try to do anything with Bart Gunn. He was just languishing. So he saw this as an opportunity to do something. Godfather was the same way. Draws was the same way. You know, a lot of these guys that was in this tournament, they were just guys they were mid-card guys looking to break through, looking to impress and break through and do something major. And they were just basically supposed to be food for Dr. Death. That's really was the point. You know, again, all of the legit shooters in the back thought Dr. Death was going to breeze through this tournament. And then the office was like, Dr. Death should breeze through this tournament because he had this huge reputation. And then the guy tears his hamstring and gets knocked out. And then you put all this heat on Bart Gunn, who didn't do anything wrong. He did what you guys wanted him to do. You know, yes, he surprised you. But you really should have just pulled him to the side and said, hey, okay, but I know I said that already. But Bart Gunn also was the victim of the matchmaking stuff because he was not supposed to fight Dr. Death before the final. I think they was on different sides of the bracket or whatever. So Pritchard and all them guys decided to jig the matchmaking so that he could fight Dr. Death next, and thinking that Dr. Death was going to beat him. And again, that was just more logs on the fire for Bart Gunn because it was actually motivating them that they discounted him so much that, you know, people were not interested in seeing him win. It was like, okay, pay the guy to go away if that's really what you wanted to do. Like, that's how boxing always works. But I'm just repeating myself, right? So Bart Gunn wins this tournament, and he goes and they send him home. Essentially, they sent Bart Gunn home because they didn't have no plans to work with him to do anything. You know, he can't work with Austin because he has never been presented as a major threat. He still didn't have, you didn't change his personality or anything like that. You just made him essentially a pseudo boxer, you know, and I think Mark Merrill was doing that gimmick at the same time. So they had no plans creatively for him. So they sent him home. And then they decide that, you know, to frustrate the guy by sending him home. And they decide, okay, we're going to do this fight with Butterbean at WrestleMania 15. And they send Bart Gunn. This is the ironic thing. They send Bart Gunn to boxing camp, right? They sent him to learn how to fight so that he could fight this professional fighter, right? Which intuitively you would think, well, that's merciful. You know, they don't want to send a guy untrained in there with a professional fighter like Butterbean. Butterbean is a professional fighter. You know, you don't want to send an untrained pro wrestler in there with them. You send a reasonably trained boxer in there. And because Bart Gunn had this boxing training, he tried to use it, and that's why he got knocked the fuck out. That's the ironic part. It's because he would have done better. And Butterbean says like he probably would have done better if he'd have just used his brawling style. But trying to stand in front of me and box me, and I'm a professional fighter. That's why he got knocked out. And another interesting thing was Butterbean said like he essentially got the call. It was kind of like a punishment. It's almost like, to me, it felt like a mafia hit. Like, this goddamn Bart Gunn, fucked up our investment, fucked up our money, even though it wasn't Bart Gunn's fault. It was Vince Russo's fault, and McMahon's, and, Jim Ross and all those guys, because they let Dr. Death be in the tournament. I mean, if you saw people getting hurt, you should have pulled Dr. Death out of the tournament. You could have did that too. You had 100 different ways of getting them out of this shit. So, but he got punished, quote unquote. Bart Gunn got knocked out, in front of the world, humiliated, and then decided that he decided like, hey, that's it for me. He left. He went on to do some MMA things. I found it interesting that he almost got into a rematch with Butterbean. But he wanted more time to prepare for it, and it just never happened. So now I guess he works like a regular job. But Vince Russo, they went into the Vince Russo Jim Cornette debate into this. Because Cornette, very smartly, again, Cornette is not 100% correct all the time. I know I probably defend him more than I should, considering that I like things that he absolutely hates, like the Firefly Funhouse and the Boneyard match and all that type of stuff. But he was correct about this. Vince Russo was so unaware that his Brawl for All idea had damaged so many reputations, had injured so many people, had ruined a huge investment that the WWE was preparing to make, had exposed the wrestling business as, and as illegitimate, because now you have to argue how this part of the show is real and the other parts are not. You have to explain that. And Russo's idea is, because he's not a wrestling fan, is, well, everybody knows this bullshit. That's not the point. The point is you can't have, this is real, everything else is fake. Right? You just can't have that. That's a contradiction. You can't do that. So Jim Cornette calls him morally bankrupt and said that it was a sabotage of the talent and integrity of the business. And and Russo basically was laughing, because he was like, it's just wrestling, bro. It's just wrestling. And Cornette says, like, wrestling has been the most important part of my life, most important thing in my life. But it's not just that. When you say it's just wrestling, you're talking about guys who got hurt, right? Like, you're talking about money that you took out of their pocketbook, and yes, they could have gotten hurt in a wrestling match, but they're trained to be in wrestling matches. They're not trained for tough man fights. And yes, it's also you could say that there's some blame to put on the performers, because they did have the option and they could have said no. And you've seen certain people back out of it. They could have backed out at any time, but nobody wants to be the guy that backed out. Nobody wants to be, but I'm glad that, you can see, I'm glad it was optional. I'm glad they just didn't hurdle guys into a corner and say, all of you guys are going to fight each other. So, but that wasn't it, because he also had the fighters. We had fighters who had a lack of technique. They did not prepare, and they had a lack of preparation. You had ever-changing rules. You had judges and referees with no experience. And, but Russo thought it was funny. And that's really was the ultimate goal, was to impress Vince Russo, who wanted to watch Bradshaw get knocked out. That's really all he wanted. And that's fucked up. And that's reason enough for me to be like, I understand why Jim Cornette hates this guy and why he don't like him so much. It just makes no sense. Draws was also in this documentary. Darren Drozdov, who broke his neck in a power bomb with D'Lo Brown. They kind of folded that into here too. The two of them talked about it, about what happened, and D'Lo just basically says he it was an accident. that he tried to powerbomb Darren Drozdov, and Darren might have slipped or something like that and landed on his neck. It was real ugly. They didn't show the video obviously because they don't have it, but I'm pretty sure WWE didn't have it, and probably would never let it be seen. But it's a real bizarre thing that you had Jim Ross, who really loved Dr. Death Steve Williams. He said he loved him like a little brother. Dr. Death Steve Williams had a reputation in Mid South, had a reputation in Japan as being this hard nosed, tough guy. He was earmarked for a run with Stone Cold Steve Austin, who actually knew and was aware of Dr. Death Steve Williams and probably could have made some real money with him. But because Bradshaw said was going around saying, if this were real, I'd beat everybody here, Vince Russo decided, well, we're going to make him prove it. And you end up injuring a bunch of fucking guys, ruining careers, sabotaging the business, exposing the business, and killing a multi-million-dollar investment. This guy's a fucking moron. Okay, so they called it the worst idea, wrestling's worst idea. It's obviously not. It's not the worst idea. There's some ideas that have been worse since, but the Brawl for All is on the list. You know, it's on the list as being a really bad idea. So this documentary was pretty. It went by pretty fast. You know, because the tournament itself was short. There's so many injuries and people pulling out and all that type of stuff, and it's always an interesting story to talk about, interesting story to tell, but it's pretty short. You know, there's not much to it other than WWE tried to have a tough man shoot tournament, and a bunch of fucking guys hurt, and the wrong guy won, and the company then punished the guy for winning, even though he didn't do anything wrong. You know, so that's it. Peace.